Hey there guys, so I want to thank you for taking the time to check out today's video, where of course, as always, I do have something that I want to discuss with you guys today, and again, to go over some, interesting topics, some thoughtful topics, especially when it comes to, of course, LGBTQ and gay culture in itself. So in today's topic, what I want to discuss in particular, and again, like I've mentioned every time, I usually have something that crosses my mind or something that I really would like to discuss each and every week. And so in this particular discussion, what I wanted to go over is sort of the topic of this, dichotomy of open relationships versus monogamy when it comes to gay culture in itself. And I think this is a common sort of topic that, many guys like to discuss. And I think it's something that, there's different sort of perspectives that I see when it comes to this. And as far as this topic, I'm pretty, open when it comes to, whatever somebody is more geared towards or whatever, they feel comfortable with. And so when it comes to open relationships themselves, I can respect, somebody who that's their agreement with their partner or who they're with. And I can respect that that's, the decision they've made. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if they are both in agreement with, how they want their relationship to be. I think that's totally fine. I have had friends that are in, different kind of relationship dynamics. Whether that be, in a poly relationship or whether that be, again, open relationship. Everybody kind of has their own, whatever makes them feel comfortable. My main thing when it comes to relationships, whatever that dynamic may be, is that all of these different aspects are consensual. Of course, that's the main thing that is very important. I think that's, of course, what should be the main point that makes that relationship valid, I guess, for lack of a better term. And so it's important to make sure everybody is in agreement with how they feel comfortable, what makes them feel comfortable in particular. So when it comes to that side of things, I don't see that necessarily as being a bad thing. I think it's important, just to really discuss boundaries when it comes to whatever relationship that you're in. I think that's the most important part of it, is that communication. Like what I've mentioned, before. I think there was another video where I talked a little bit about relationships, but I haven't really talked about this side in particular, where the difference between open and monogamy. So what I think is most important is that communication that you have with who you're in a relationship with, so that you understand sort of those different boundaries that you guys have. I think that's the most important aspect of it. So sort of having that difference there, I think, is very crucial. I also think at the same time, it's important to, again, find a spot where you guys are comfortable with whoever that you're, really communicating who you're dating, communicating who you're with. I think that's important, not only in the relationship aspect of things, in the, sort of just the communication aspect of things, but also sexually. I think, of course, it's important to know who you guys are seeing, of course. I think that's the most important part, to really be vocal when you're in an open relationship. And normally I'm not somebody who, is in an open relationship. I've always been the more monogamous type, quote unquote, I guess you could say. So I can't really say that, but I've always been somebody who, I don't like to judge other people for, how they want to be in their relationship, or how they approach relationships in general. I think, I hear, like, there's a lot of different discussions where a lot of guys will complain that there's so many, gay guys that are in open relationships. And that's their, whatever somebody is comfortable with doing, whatever they feel is, the relationship for them, that's what they want to do. I don't see that as a bad thing, and I don't see it, like, let them do, that's their relationship. Whatever is comfortable for them and whatever works for them, let them do their own thing. And that's the way I see it. I just think there's a lot of judgment with that, and I don't understand. Like I said, I've had friends, whether they're in a poly relationship or open relationship, I never judge them. As long as, again, all of those different sides are consensual, that's really all that should matter. Now, like I've said, I'm more of a monogamous top individual. I've not to say that open relationships are bad in my perspective, but I've always been somebody who connects with one other person. I want that connection with one other person as a partner. So that's kind of always been my perspective on relationships. But then at the same time, I understand how somebody can, I think especially it can be kind of hard because especially with men, of course, one thing that we all know as men that we are very sexual beings. It's just natural. All men have that inclination to be more sexual and to want to, go out and meet other guys, and that's natural. That's just the human nature of being a man. So that's I can understand, that aspect. And I think what matters there, especially when you're having sex and going out, I think the big thing is of course, really taking your sexual health into consideration. I think that's the most important thing. I think again, as long as things are consensual and as long as you are again not being, you know, like not being unhealthy sexually, like not just, of course, taking care of yourself. I think that's the most important thing. I think you can go and have fun, but I think you do need to sort of have that sense of security and safety when you are, talking to people or when you are having these relationships. And I think that's the most important part of it. So, again, I think that's, again, that's how I see that. Now, when it comes to monogamy, again, the same sort of process and the same aspect is what you take into consideration with it, where you want to have that communication and you want to have those form of boundaries. Of course, monogamy is totally different than an open relationship, but whatever works, again, having that clear communication, I think, is most important. And again, for everybody, we all have this idea of what a relationship sort of means to us and how we define it. So that's just whatever works for you. Now, the reason why I think monogamy is you know, more of my as like direction that as an individual, is because I really like to know that I'm with that one person that, there's not really any kind of, it's just us two. That's kind of the way I see it. But then again, that's not to say that I maybe at one point wouldn't want to be open to, something else. I'm sort of in that middle ground where it's like, as long as my main thing is making sure that whoever I'm with, if they're, happy with the relationship, I'm happy with the relationship. That's kind of the way that I see it. As long as we communicate with each other, I think that's the big thing above all else, regardless of what is decided in that relationship is really communication and being clear, okay, and being honest with each other. That's what I always focus on. I'm not somebody who would, as long as you're communicating with me, you know, what you're doing. If it came to a point, like say I was in a relationship and then, there was a decision that I wanted to still be in a relationship, but, see other people, the only thing that my stipulation with that would be is that you communicate who you're with. I think that's what I would say is the communication side of things. I wouldn't want things to be secretive or again, that would be something that I would just discuss one on one with whoever I'm with. But what I'm trying to say here is I think there is a lot of sort of, I guess you would say, a stigma that comes with the open relationship side of things and how people see open relationships. And so, again, I just think that's between who you're with. I don't think that's anybody else's judgment or business. Whoever, whatever you and your partner do, you know, as long as things are consensual, that's all that really matters, in my honest opinion. But again, like I said, either way, whatever your decision is totally fine. And like I said, I think a lot of that comes down to everybody, who you're with, your partner, who they're seeing again. And again, I understand why a lot of people are geared towards monogamy. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, all of the aspects I think are important are, of course, is being consensual in those relationships themselves. I think that's really the most important side of all of it. But that's what I really wanted to discuss today. Again, I think there's a lot of stigma around that, and I think it's important to just, let people be. Don't, judge people. And if you, let's say you talk to somebody and they're in an open relationship, and, just, don't really judge them for that. That's totally fine. Like I said, I've been around friends, I've been around, a lot of different people, and I always try to make it basically a priority to not judge them and not see them as lesser just because their relationship dynamic is that way. That's what they feel is comfortable for them, and that's totally fine. That's between them alone. So again, that's the way that I see it. I think that's the way a lot of people should see it. But like I said, that's all determined by who you're with. But let me know what you guys think about this, the difference between open relationships, monogamy, and what you guys are, sort of see this as far as your own perspective. But again, like I said, I'm at this point to where, because I've not really had that many relationships in my journey, sometimes I think one of the biggest problems that I think I have with, when I get in a relationship is if I'm really attracted to somebody, I have this tendency, which is, I know that it's a problem with me, that I can get really attached to who I'm with, in that sort of honeymoon phase. So that's my biggest problem that I know I have. And that's, again, you have to sort of take a step back. A lot of times if you're that type of person, I think it's important to take a step back and really, let that other person have their space. I think that's the most important thing. But I've had that problem before because I've not been in many relationships, and so I can kind of have that issue with sort of being attached to somebody. But again, that's my own personal issue that I have, that I'm, really struggle with. And so, again, that's where a lot of communication comes into play as well. But like I said, my relationships have been, kind of all over the place with, who I've been with. But I always really try to make it a priority with anybody that I talk to or date, that I talk with them, and really, if there's something that they're not comfortable with, or if they feel like, I'm rushing things, or, I want to be able to talk, with them and let them be comfortable. Because that's a big thing with me, like whoever I'm with, is I want them to be comfortable with wherever, what stage we're in our relationship. And again, I think that's the most important. But that's what I wanted to discuss today, guys. I hope that this was a little bit of an interesting topic. And again, I think it's something that should be addressed a little bit more because, again, I think the open relationship thing, I think people really dog on that too much, and they just down people all the time for it, and it drives me crazy. So I just wanted to share that. Again, definitely share your comments that you guys have and how you feel. Again, I think everybody has their own opinion and what feels right for them. But with all that being said, guys, as always, I can't thank you enough for your comments, your support, and taking the time to check out what I do, like to discuss here on this channel outside of just fitness, but going over some of the topics related to, of course, being gay and the LGBTQ experience itself. So thank you guys once again for your time, and I will see you guys in the next video. So definitely share this and like this if you really found this topic interesting. And again, guys, thank you so much for watching.